Hello and welcome. My name is iToaster, and there has been something that I have been sort of focused on for a while now. Well, there's a few things I've been focused on actually now to think about it. Um, Quite a few. I haven't really talked about any of them on the channel yet. There's a few that I should mention at some point, but I've been really getting into sim racing lately. With the wheel and everything, and I want to try and get a cockpit and everything all set up at some point down the road, but this is slow. It's really fun to actually keep on going back to a game like Forza, which, on that note, the three people that came here as actual sim racers have now left. But I like it. And you know what? That involves a whole video on its own, so we'll go over that some other time. I do actually want to talk about why a game like this is so important, even though, you always see the major channels talking about Dirt Rally, Assetto Corsa Competizione, stuff like that, or iRacing. I recently did a hardware upgrade, and I thought it'd be a good time to sort of compare a couple of things that don't really get compared that often, because when I was looking to purchase this, it's a Logitech G29 race wheel for the record. I went on Reddit, I went on the internet, I did various research across a whole bunch of different sites for quite a while trying to figure out what a good wheel would be, and I kept on coming up with one answer, and that was the Thrustmaster T300. That's one of the big things is, I wanted to talk about that because when you see comparisons, I've seen very few comparisons between something like a driving Force GT and a G29 or a G923 or something like that, because oftentimes people upgrade from a lower end Logitech into a Thrustmaster or into a Fanatec direct drive wheel these days. Not many are going from Logitech to Logitech, and I've seen a lot of posts, well, not a lot, but I've definitely seen a few people that have talked about the difference between them and saying that they regret upgrading from their older Logitech wheel to their newer Logitech wheel because the difference is not noticeable and they're just too similar. And I want to take a moment to kind of show that that's not necessarily the case, at least not as far as I've seen. So I want to show you both wheels back to back. I've actually got a little bit of a comparison show up. I'll have the microphone right by the wheel so you can hear what it sounds like. It's not going to be great. I don't have a mic stand. This is I have a piece of foam under the microphone to sort of act as a damper for sound, and it's passable but not great. You will still hear a lot of noise because I don't have a desk. I have a plastic folding table that I got from Walmart or Target or something for like 15 bucks. Why? Because I didn't want to pay for a desk. I got this thing 3 years ago because I needed a table to put all this shit on when I was initially living on my own. And I couldn't be asked to get a desk because it just cost too much. And for 15 bucks, this is the same size as a desk. It honestly is. Like, it's not sturdy by any stretch of the imagination. It's the first thing I want to do, I think, before I show you the comparison between the two actually running, is I actually want to kind of go over the materials on each. And I want to point out that the Driving Force GT, from what I understand, has the same motor, the same force feedback motor as a Logitech G25. So if you have a G25, the force feedback part of this will apply to you, though I do know that the G25 has better materials than the Driving Force GT does, because it is actually made out of leather and metal and stuff, much like the G29. However, this Driving Force GT is not made out of those materials, but there are definitely quite a few people out there that still have one of these, and I think it's worthwhile to make that comparison. So starting out, I just want to say one thing real quickly. If you are considering purchasing a racing wheel and you're someone who is looking from the outside in at the sim racing community, I would very, very seriously consider this. Don't just buy the wheel and think that you're going to enjoy yourself. The first thing that you need to do, is, Steve even liked the genre in the first place. And that can be a little bit difficult to do because when you get into the sim racing games like Assetto Corsa and whatnot, they don't really take well to a controller. That's the problem. It's very much a situation of the hardware enhances the software experience at that point, versus a game such as, Forza, for example, or Gran Turismo if you're on PlayStation, where the hardware enhances, where the software enhances the hardware experience on the other way around. So when you have a nice setup, you have a game that's going to make that setup more fun versus having a setup that makes the game more fun, in the case of The Sims. So if you just have a controller, like an Xbox One controller, if you're on PC or if you're on Xbox, of course, like I do here, or if you have a PlayStation controller, obviously, as well, or something like that, then I'd first, if you haven't yet played one of the so-called simcade games like Forza or Gran Turismo, I would first start with that. Forza Horizon's a go-to very easily. You know, it's hard not to recommend Forza Horizon to literally everyone who has even a passing interest in cars, and that goes for all of them. I don't mean like, you know, specific ones. I mean all of them. They've always been very good. I played 2, 3, 4, and 5. I didn't actually play the first one, funny enough. But, you know, outside of that, and I've played a lot of the Forza Motorsports as well, and those are very good, although you can't buy them anymore. But again, that's another video. Gran Turismo, obviously, haven't had a chance to play it, if you can believe that. But once again, I've heard very good things about it. The newest one obviously has its issues, but is still a competent game for what it does. And really, you just need to try them out and see if it's something you enjoy, because those are games that are designed to take advantage of your controller to the best of its ability. You don't need a wheel to enjoy them or be able to just get around a circuit without crashing and still set a good lap time. So then if you choose to get a wheel, you can continue to play that game with the wheel and you'll actually have a good time doing it. But assuming that you've already done that, assuming you're moving into a point where you want to get a wheel, you can get something like this Driving Force GT right here for probably, I don't know, $100, maybe 150 if you got it used. And they're gear driven, they're really well put together. This thing is ultra reliable, fantastic. It's old, from 2007, but still works like an absolute charm. Although, as I mentioned, didn't get a whole lot of use either. Though I haven't heard a whole lot of horror stories of these things failing. And likewise, an old G29 would likely do just as well, though the G29 would likely be more pricey because of its materials. This has a rubber wheel, which is actually all right, because, you know, when we're talking about materials here, someone who's looking at the cheaper end for wheels would probably consider something like a Thrustmaster T150 or a TMX, which are about $200 or $230, I believe. US, I should point out. And this, being cheaper when it's used, does have a rubber wheel, and those have, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, a plastic wheel, which I would never advise someone actively look for a plastic wheel. Not in real life, and not for something like this either. Rubber's fine, honestly. I mean, it's a little stiff, but it's grippy, and that's what you care about most of all. So I've never had any issue with just being able to hold on to this thing as it goes around. The force feedback is a little weak. And I wouldn't so much say that the amount of force it puts is weak. It's the return speed that's not quite there. This thing turns slower than you might think it does. Quick enough that you definitely get good response, but it's just a little slow to respond, is all. The rest of it's plastic. You've got plastic innards right here, are all around, a plastic button in the middle that actually works as a horn. That is something that the G29 does not actually have. Little switch right here that spins around, button, couple plus and minus, and an absolutely horrendous little shifter right here, sequential. You can't plug a manual gear shifter into this thing because it only has 2 ports on the back. And I'll go over setting these things up, and I will move the camera angle to be more appropriate when that happens. But right now I thought I'd just do that from this point of view because it's easy enough to just hold it up, because this wheel is very, very light. It's really light, honestly, which might be a good or a bad thing for you. If you're on a weaker table like this, it's almost a better thing, if I'm being honest with you, because this isn't really going to rattle your table very much with its slower return speed and its relatively lower amount of force feedback, I would say, comparatively to newer wheels. It is noisy, though. I don't know if you can hear that too well right now. I will show you the sound more in depth later, but this is a very noisy wheel. And I don't know if that's just age or what, but it is extremely noisy. So that's all. But there's also some notchiness in it, but again, I'll go over that in a bit. Material-wise, though, plastic, lightweight, rubber rim, which is absolutely fine, but reliable. Works like a charm. Never had an issue with it. Then, of course, we get to the pedals for the Driving Force GT, and that's another story. These are weird. The underside, weirdly enough, is exactly the same. I apologize about the wire I have wrapped up around it. Let me get that out of the way. The underside is actually very similar to that of any other Logitech wheel, in the sense that it's just a great big piece of plastic with this thing right here that goes away and then comes out if you pull that little switch, for carpets specifically. A bunch of spikes that hold it in place and do a very good job of doing it. But as you can probably tell, this is, much like the wheel, very, very light. Like, I mean, let me pinky test this. Very, very lightweight. This pedal set is very flimsy feeling, so to speak, and that's probably its biggest issue. And the other issue is, I mean, these pedals have no resistance at all, like none. The gas has like a tiny amount of resistance. Obviously there's a spring in there somewhere, it wouldn't come back up. But the brakes, a little better, but still not much going on there. These are crap. There's no other way to describe it, but they are better than a controller, and I want to make that very clear. Because if you're looking to simply start getting into sim racing or something like that, they will give you the necessary control you need to actually play those games, to play actual sim racers, even though I have Forza sitting over here on Steam right now. But they will actually give you that necessary control that you do need. And for that purpose, you know, they do it right. It's just not the best feeling thing, you know? Compared to the wheel, which despite its relatively cheap materials is actually really nice, this just is not great. It is interchangeable, however, because it uses the exact same plug as any other Logitech set of pedals does, which I will also show again later. But that's pretty much it as far as that goes. Let's move on. Now we're getting into the meat of it. This is the new thing that I picked up. It arrived about a week and a half ago at this point, and I've been using it quite a bit ever since then. This is the G29. It is the PlayStation version of the Logitech wheels these days, because there's the G920, which is for the Xbox, and then there was the G29, which is for the PlayStation. And nowadays it's G923, which I believe is just called G923 regardless of whether you get the PlayStation or Xbox version. But I did have my reasons for getting the PlayStation version. They both work with PC. Let's start with that. It doesn't matter if it's a PlayStation or an Xbox One, it'll work just fine with PC. And I think that goes for pretty much any wheel you get. It's only important if you're on console specifically. But this actually has more buttons than a G920 does, even though the G920 was $20 more expensive for some reason. This was $280. G920 was $300. You can see right here it has that same, in fact it's very similar. Let me pull off the autofocus and get this thing nice and scanned up. Bada bing, bada boom. And we're focused. Perfect. You can see it has the same plastic spinny wheel right here as the Driving Force GT. Same buttons right there. Nice little set of buttons here. No center button for a horn, which is really not that important anyway. The only game I found that's any use for that, let me turn that back on. Only game I found that's really any use for that is Forza Horizon, you know, and stuff like that. Is that even focusing? I think it is. Oh my. So really, it's, as far as buttons go, it just has more stuff than the G920 does. Because the G920 doesn't have those. It doesn't have this, doesn't have that, doesn't have those, and it doesn't have the RPM shift lights at the top, which are, I'd like to point something out real quick, useless. Because, unless you're in a full sim racing cockpit, of course. So the only reason I even upgraded, really, though, was because this G29 can actually be hard-mounted to a cockpit. The Driving Force GT cannot. I should have mentioned that earlier. You can't actually mount that thing down there to a sim racing cockpit, to a wheel stand, to anything like that. You can modify it to do so if you're willing to drill it apart, but the pedals, I don't even know how you do it, because the pedals, there's nothing. I don't see any way you'd be able to mount those to something. The wheel, again, modifiable. The pedals, But, so that's really the primary reason I upgraded. But outside of that, the materials are great. If you have any other G-Series Logitech wheels, probably you expect this already. Leather on the outside, real leather, not fake. And it did come with a very slight tear in it when I got it, but that's all right. It's not a big deal. This is a metal right in here. All nice metal. And plastic at the top, but, you know, it is what it is. And metal pedal shifters that are spongy as hell. But there's going to be issues, obviously. The paddle shifters could be better, could be worse, but they are what they are. And they're definitely competent. Everything on this works just like it's advertised, and also it is much, much quieter. You'll hear that a lot more once I actually go and put it together, but that notchiness of the Driving Force GT is not there anymore, even though it is still gear-based. It has much faster return speeds and at least, well, okay, a little bit faster return speeds, I should say. Fast enough that it just kind of gets rid of that lag that you feel on the Driving Force GT. and just harder feedback in general, I've noticed. Despite supposedly having a very similar motor, it's been tuned in such a way that it just outputs that little bit extra, you know? Moving on to the pedals of the G29, like I said, it's got the same bottom as the Driving Force GT does, plastic underneath, but with mounting holes all over the place, so you can mount this thing to an actual, wow, I'm bright, to an actual mounting thing. I've never worked with a cam before, if you can't tell. Well, once, but it doesn't count. And the same spikes right here to hold it in place on the carpet. Nice and simple, does a sizable job, and perhaps more importantly, this has weight to it, like actual weight. I believe it weighs 5 or 6 pounds, this thing does, which is much, much nicer than whatever the pedals on the Driving Force GT weigh. And also, these are also metal, with one weird thing, and that's that they have little plastic inserts in here, which are really, really weird, for lack of a better word to put it. I don't know why they went with plastic inserts. If there were ever a time to actually use rubber, it would have been these right here. And if there's one thing I want to actually change, well, there's a couple of things I actually want to change on these pedals, but I'd want to have rubber stuff in there, and I've been looking around to see if anyone's made modification kits that might add rubber to that. The pedals themselves, they're, you know, great feedback, honestly. Well, not great. Better feedback, I should say. Better resistance. So this gas pedal, for example, has a lot more resistance than the Driving Force GT. In fact, let me check something. Oh, this gas pedal has more resistance than the brake pedal does on the Driving Force GT, for reference. The clutch pedal has a little more resistance than the gas because it just has a bigger spring in it. And the brake pedal is weird. So they did something with this. I found this out through my research, and it is definitely true. Both the G29, the G920, and I believe the G923 as well, by extension, they put a rubber thing in there. It's this literal rubber rectangle that is inside of there. So when you push this brake pedal down, it only goes to a certain point. And past that, you have to push really hard to get it to go down. And what happens is the firmware in the wheel detects that, you know, at this point is where the rubber should hit. So anything past that, to make it hypersensitive, to simulate like those load cell pedals, those pressure-based systems. And it's not great. I don't like it. I really don't. I wish the rubber thing wasn't there, and I wish it was just a linear response, but that is not possible because of the firmware in the wheel. You can't just take the rubber thing out and expect it to work competently. It doesn't work like that. I haven't tried, admittedly, but from what I understand, that firmware will continue to believe that there is a rubber thing and be really, really sensitive at the end. So it's kind of weird to get used to, if I'm being honest. In that sense, despite the worst feedback, the Driving Force GT actually has a better brake pedal, just because it's linear, and linear is better. Obviously, you could switch between the two of them because they use the same plug. In fact, they actually use the same driver, even on your computer, which was weird. The G29, in fact, to do this video, when I plugged in the Driving Force GT to get some footage of it working and sounds and all that stuff, it didn't work because the computer recognized it as a G29 because the G29 drivers had overwritten the Driving Force GT drivers because they're not different. It literally overwrote them with a newer version of the same driver. So I had to uninstall the G29's drivers and then start from the beginning reinstalling the drivers for the Driving Force GT. And then it was able to work, of course, and then when I plugged the G29 back in, it had no issue overwriting the Driving Force GT's drivers again. Who the fuck? Now, one thing I would like to talk about real quick, I'm actually going to stop screen recording real quick so I'm not burning up more disk space on my PC. But one thing I do want to talk about real quick is the difference in wiring. So it's pretty obvious when something was designed to be permanently attached versus temporarily attached when it comes to these wheels. This, despite being a relatively cheap force feedback wheel, was not really designed to be temporarily attached to a desk, is the thing. It's not that much of a hassle to take up and tear down. It takes maybe a minute, but even so, you can kind of tell the way it's laid out. So if we look under here, you can actually see, I'll go ahead and zoom that in, that we have one wire right here that, well, let me move my finger out of the way. We have one wire right here. That is the USB wire. So if I pull that up over here, you'll see this is the USB. right here. And I would like to point out real quickly, this thing works just fine on USB 2.0. It does not require USB 3.0, even though it is a relatively new wheel. Relatively, of course. They've got the G923 these days, but that's $400, and at that point, there actually is an argument to be made for Thrustmaster with their belt-driven wheels because you're paying the same price as Thrustmaster's T300 at that point. But anyway, that aside, I'm going to go ahead and put this in. There's great little wire management right here. Again, I don't have a Thrustmaster to compare to yet. That might change because, you know, I do want to actually see what competitor stuff is like. And then you've got these other two slots right here, and those are pretty self-explanatory. In fact, you've got three technically. This thing doesn't come with a gear shifter, but if you were to get one, it would actually plug in right over here. You can even see a little gear shifter icon right there. Now, this plug right here is for the pedals. If it'll focus, there we go. It's for the pedals that are underneath my desk right now. Well, table, you know, folding table. But the point is to put these in, simply wrap this around just like that. Turn that the right way. Plug it in. And then we'll just stick it in right here. Now, you might get a little confused at first because these are weird, but remember that because this is the innermost one, you want this also on the innermost wire management thing. And if you don't put these through here, you're not going to be able to flatten this thing to your desk because these wires need to be inside here for it to actually go flat against your desk, or the wires will be in the way. And then, of course, you've got the remaining one, which is for, if it wasn't stuck under my keyboard, the power cable. This is a fairly standard power cable. If you lose the power supply, you can very easily get another one off of Amazon that matches the specifications. I know this because the Driving Force GT actually uses a very similar power supply, and they're actually, now correct me if I'm wrong, but at least according to the Amazon listings, they're usually interchangeable. So you get one, you get them all. In fact, the funny thing is about Logitech, and I imagine this goes for them all, this is actually the plug right here for the Driving Force GT, if it'll focus, for the Driving Force GT's pedals, the plastic ones. So they're the same. Everything on Logitech is for the most part interchangeable. I'd actually imagine I could plug the Driving Force GT wheels into this and it would actually work. Not that I want to, because why would I want to use resistance-less plastic pedals over the metal ones? It's a case of using what you've got in this situation. And again, nothing wrong with the plastic pedals on the Driving Force GT. You don't need metal. But anyway, I got off topic there for a moment. This actually needs a little bit more slack, so I'm going to do that real quick. And I lost the power plug. There it is. So this goes in right over here, as you can see by the little power icon, hopefully anyway. And just in right there, wrap it around, and stick it on the outermost thing right here. And of course, this remaining one right here would be if you had the optional gear shifter for you manual folk. Personally, I suck at driving a manual vehicle. And either way, most of what I do in my sim racing time is I drive GT vehicles and stuff like that. So I haven't much of a use for it. But you can see that would go around into there. Now at this point, very simply, you simply take the wheel, and if you don't have a setup, which as you can see, I don't, you can remove the clips that come right here. In fact, let me grab one so you can see once I remember where I put them. Haha, clip, see? Not that big of a deal. But this little guy right here, when you first get one of these, and the same goes for the Driving Force GT, by the way, this will be on right here, just like that, if you can see. And they come off pretty easily. They're a little bit stubborn. I, in my case, used a pair of screwdrivers simply to wedge it in on one side, wedge it on the other, it popped right off. No damage whatsoever to this, but you do want to be careful because, again, they are plastic. They are not rubber or anything like that. But if you have something like this folding table that's nice and thick, then don't worry, you can fit it. There is a distance of about 2 inches in these holes right here. So with the clips off, it's about 2 inches, I would say. Maybe a little less. Anyway, once ready, goes on just like that. But because we're going to be testing 2 wheels, I'm actually not going to put this right here. I'm going to put it... that's one of the downsides of having a folding table. I'm going to put it off to the side, right over here. Sorry about that. put this thing right back up where you guys can see it, because, and if you don't know what that is, go and remember which channel you're watching, the 3 of you that are actually watching this as subscribers, because I imagine not a lot of you are very interested, my former audience, in what I am doing. But we'll see. And that's about as sturdy as the desk will get it. As you can see, there's a fair amount of wobble in every direction right now, but it is what it is, you know? So that's attached right there, just like that. And we'll put the Driving Force GT's wheel, pedals underneath here, where I can get to them fairly easily. And put the little plug up through the back. There we are. And of course we do need its power supply as well. That's the computer, that's the monitor, that's the G29, that's probably the speakers. So I probably need all of those. That's okay. We're going to do something stupid. We're going to plug this in without a power strip straight into the wall like an idiot. So with the Driving Force GT, once I unravel this cable, it is a similar story but without the cable management, because if I turn this thing upside down, there's nothing under here, as you can see. Nothing at all. This wire comes out the back, and everything else plugs in off to the side over here. So with this, you don't really have to do much. But just to show you anyway, I'm going to show you plugging them in. With no management required, this is the back side of the wheel, because this is the top, this is the back right behind a little plastic shifter right here. So, pedal right here, just like that. Power supply, same exact size and everything as the G29. Right there, just like that. And then, of course, to attach it, keep this wire, well, once I figure out why it's all tangled up, out of the way, because without cable management, it can get caught under there fairly easily. We'll put that right there, just like that. That fell over again, didn't it? I'm keeping that up for the video. Normally I don't care, but and then the same thing on the G29 with these two little clamps. Screw them down. Once again, they will come with those things on them, but that's all right. And now we have both a Driving Force GT and a G29 hooked up, and you can already probably hear that. Now, it's a little unfair because the microphone's actually closer right now to the Driving Force GT than it is to the G29, but you know, that is what it is at the end of the day. So we'll move the microphone so it's in a more appropriate position for the two of them, but other than that, let's start testing. All right, so listen to this. The Driving Force GT is way louder, and listen here. It's just noisy. This is a post voice. I apologize. I was not talking during this, and I will attempt to remain quiet for most of this so you can hear the feedback of the wheel. Now, the two things you're going to be hearing, because I have the microphone pointed at the wheel right now, it is a front mic, not a top mic, are you're going to be hearing these higher rumbly noises and then these really low noises. The low noises, hear that, are the sound of the wheel essentially rocking the desk. So that's how much force feedback the wheel is essentially giving to me. Whereas that higher pitched, hear that? That higher pitched noise you're hearing is more or less the sound of, that right there, is the sound of the wheel having its notchiness problems. The Driving Force GT has a very notchy force feedback system. Listen here, I believe I spin out here, because I'm an idiot. Yep, that's where I spun out because I cannot drive for shit. Once again, I am a beginner sim racer, hence the use of Forza 7 as opposed to something like Assetto Corsa. I may use an actual sim race in the next video if you all actually want me to, that is, or if you want me to rematch these two wheels using an actual sim racer. So you can probably tell by the noise and the look, and I will also tell you from my feel here, that the Driving Force GT, its notchiness feeling is ridiculously high Compared to the G29, which feels like it's pulling you when it gives force feedback, the driving Force GT feels like it is nudging you, and that is not because it lacks the force, but because of how wide the distance is between the teeth on the gears. Really shows the difference between the old motors and the new motors. Anyway, there will be one more full lap after this one, and then I will speak up again real quickly when I zoom in. Now I zoomed in here, and I will cut in a moment to a better shot, but just be aware that this is to essentially show you the vibrations of the wheel as it sits. Now obviously the table's going to be shaking as well, based partially on my movements, but also based on how much the wheel is moving. I am driving very lightly with one hand, I am staring at the video preview, and I am going to mess up a lot as a result because I'm not really even paying attention to where I'm going. But that will give you an opportunity to see exactly how much force is really being applied visually from the wheel to the table and by extension me. Because however much it's shaking the table, well, that's pretty much how much it's going to be wobbling my hand around too. The microphone placement has not changed and has remained the same. I will speak up again when we switch to the G29. Okay, so we are now switching to the G29 and listen to this. With the mic in the same spot, it is super, super quiet. Now remember, the low rumbling you are hearing is the table's vibrations. You aren't going to hear those as the person who is actually using the wheel. So that is just a representation of how much force feedback there is when you hear that noise, and a byproduct of me not having a mic stand. Listen to the high sounds and listen how much less that notchy sound comes through because the wheel is so much smoother in its application. Anyway, go ahead and watch the next 1.5 crappy laps from me around Brands Hatch, and I will speak up when we zoom in. Once again, I'm going to drive like crap because I'm driving one-handed, except for the one hand behind shifting gears down. I am staring once again mostly at the video preview, though trying to pay a little more attention to where I'm going, which means I will crash and spin again. And this should give you another idea of the vibrations visually of the G29 on this wobbly plastic table. So, what is there really left to say about these two different wheels? Well, they're both fine, honestly. Like I said, the Driving Force GT is loud, cheap made, but definitely doable. You know, if that's your budget and you want to get a decent racing wheel that you know will work for its reliability, then get one, by all means. The G29, if you're looking to get something that's actually like new, and you're considering, you know, you got all these people bagging on you saying you got to get Thrustmaster, you got to get Fan Attack. No, you don't. The G29 is completely serviceable, totally fine. I love it. And it's going to help me really get more into sim racing, I think, with everything else. It's hard mountable to a cockpit. It's got great materials, like I said. It's very quiet, surprisingly, for a gear-based wheel, from what I understand. And, you know, you'll enjoy it. You really, honestly will. There is no reason to, you know, get something that's way more expensive than you were planning on getting just because the internet told you that you're wrong at the end of the day, is what I'm trying to say, because there's just too many people that will tell you otherwise, and I just want to make that clear. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with any of these. Get the best that you can afford. Those are words from Carl Gosling, another automotive, well, sim racing YouTuber that I actually very much enjoy. And if that means you're going to something like a used Driving Force GT or a new G29, then so be it. And they're great, honestly. G29 is definitely a huge improvement over the Driving Force GT as well, despite what a lot of people have said, you know? It is not the same thing in the slightest. It's way better. Like, it's a whole other league compared to the old Driving Force GT, honestly. And I want to make that very clear, too. You're not going to regret your purchase if you come and decide to get one of these things. You really not. If this is something you're on the fence about and, you know, you've been all over the internet and seen all these things, then just do it. You know? You're going to enjoy it. I really do think you will. The G923, on the other hand, I can't speak for that yet because I haven't tried it, and I wasn't really curious about spending an extra $100 for some rattling in the wheel, to be honest with you. But who knows? Maybe it's nice. Outside of that, I don't think I've got much else to say. So you'll see more videos like this, but not very often. Once again, this is not going to become a regular thing, I don't think. Just something I do on the side every now and then, maybe as a filler, because I've been taking so long between my other projects I'm working on, which I promise I'll reveal more information on. For those of you that are like don't care at all about this stuff and for some reason stuck through this till now, which is like what, none of you, but even so, the point is that, you know, I'll reveal more stuff on those other projects I'm working on. I promise. Just as soon as they're ready to reveal, because one of them I had to cancel, and that's for reasons that I'll talk about some other time, once again. But anyway, I seriously hope that in some way I've shown you something you may not have known about the G29, about Logitech wheels in general, and how they have genuinely improved. So, you know, outside of that, not much else to say. I'll see everyone in the next video.